because we should be watching this.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to, it's recording for those of friends and members of our different organizations that couldn't tune in tonight. We're going to record it and then we'll put it up on YouTube and everyone will be able to get to watch it later. So I just wanted to welcome everyone tonight, and I really wanted to thank you all for coming. Stephanie, Cassie, Toby, everyone that's going to be part of the panel after the documentary is shown tonight. I also wanted to explain a little bit about what Hands Across the Sand is, and I'm just reading off of the website, the Hands Across the Sand website, actually. So, fortunately, tonight we have Janet again. She presented to our meeting at the beginning of the month, which was such a joy. It was such a wonderful experience to speak. Know you, get to learn about your documentaries, and one of them we're going to see all of it tonight, called Stories of the Spill, that features the 1969 oil spill off the coast of Santa Barbara. So we have with us tonight Stephanie Robertson, who is representing the Surfrider Foundation Santa Barbara chapter tonight. Hey, Stephanie, thank you. And Liz Beal, who's representing CFROG, which is, I want to call it the old acronym, but it's Climate First Replacing Oil and Gas. She's going to be speaking tonight. So Cross the Sand was created by Floridian Dave Rauschkolb in October 2009 in response to a bill passed in the Florida House of Representatives that would lift a ban on nearshore drilling, trying to send a powerful message to leaders that expanding oil drilling in our oceans is a dirty, dangerous endeavor. He said, we must compel our local and national lawmakers to steer a clear path towards clean energy sources and decrease our dependence on dirty, dangerous fuels. Every oil spill endangers coastal tourism industries, ravages sea life and seafood industry, and impacts the lives of every person in its path for generations after. More than 10,000 Floridians joined hands on February 13th, 2010, and to show united opposition to offshore drilling. As a result of these efforts, the bill was tabled the next month. 2 months later, the BP Deepwater Horizon exploded of Mexico, and a global Hands Across the Sand was ordered. I was going to start to cry, to urge President Barack Obama to abandon his bid to open the continental United States waters to offshore oil drilling. Today, we stand in solidarity with the exceptional nonprofits that create awareness for this ongoing concern, like CFROG here tonight, and documentarians like Janet Bridgers. Liz Beal, the executive director of CFROG Climate First Replacing Oil and Gas, is an invaluable asset to our community and a great communicator of the current issues we face locally regarding offshore and onshore oil drilling. Alert will be on our panel after the screening for Q&A, as will Surfrider Santa Barbara, Cassie, who is our staff member over there, myself, and Bill. I think Bill's going to later on tonight. He's our regional manager. All of our organizations rely on donations and or volunteerism to run our program, make a difference. Cassie can put everyone's contact information into the chat. And if you're interested in contributing on any level, please do so. We really appreciate it. And one of the things I'm really curious about is if you guys could take a second to put into the chat how you learned about the event tonight. If it was on Nextdoor or through our newsletter, we have an Eventbrite event out there. If it was promoted by CFROG, we really need to learn a little bit about our reach and how we're, oh, Bill's there. Hey, Bill. How we're actually getting our information out there. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. So, and then Janet gave us some wonderful backstory about her journey as a documentarian. But Janet, did you want to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to make the film Stories of the Spill that we're going to show tonight?
Sure. the fact is that from what I had learned more about the spill with my first documentary, which why I'm not showing that one is because it wasn't very good technically. So at any rate, I moved on, but the story itself, because the 1969 Santa Barbara oil blowout, more commonly called the spill, was one of the seminal events in the United States that catalyzed the early 70s environmental movement in California and nationwide. There were two other things that are often cited: the Cuyahoga River in Ohio catching fire, and the garbage barge off of New York. Interestingly enough, as it happened right after Richard Nixon had been elected, and Richard Nixon was a Californian. So he came back. You'll see there's a little bit of a clip that shows him, or a still that shows him coming back to visit right after being inaugurated. So the thing, that is that there was still some bipartisanship in Congress. And so the major in early 70s environmental legislation, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the creation of the EPA, and I know I'm forgetting something, but somebody else can remind me, that all happened in the early 70s and was legislation signed by Richard Nixon, a Republican. And it wouldn't, of course we know it wouldn't happen today. So telling the story again while there were still people alive who were firsthand observers was very important to me. And now briefly, I'd like to hand it over to Toby to say something. Toby, hey, I fired myself as a cinematographer and editor because I wasn't good enough. So then I hired Toby, and glad I did. Toby.
So very briefly, I had returned to New Mexico. I was born and raised in New Mexico, left in 1969 to join the military, served 5 years in the military, 2 of those in Vietnam, 5 years with the National Security Agency, and then nearly 35 years as an independent contractor to the 17 agencies in the intelligence community. As a journalist, photojournalist, and documentarian, I had over 200 documentary projects for them. Returned to New Mexico to let my mother know that I was going to retire to Costa Rica. That caused a heart attack. I rushed her to the hospital. They told me she had about 2 weeks to live, and she lived another 3 years. By that time, I had roots back here in New Mexico. My children are all grown. My youngest daughter is 30. My oldest son is 50. So they're all grown, out of college and on their own. So because I needed, this is, no matter how I say this, it's going to sound terrible. I wanted to be around. I didn't want to leave my mother while I was in Costa Rica, as much as that had been my plan and my dream my whole life. Well, not my whole life, but as I entered retirement. Anyway, the first thing that happened is the University of New Mexico asked me to start teaching a documentary course, a course in documentary making, because I had a theory about it. And then the Spanish Colonial Arts Society asked me to do a documentary called The Wardrobe of La Conquistadora. And for those of you that don't know the story, it's a statue that is over 350 years old, and people make outfits for her. And she has hundreds of outfits, including crowns that are valued in the tens of thousands. So I did that. And then the local public access station asked me if I wanted to teach a course in documentary making. I had a 10 class course, and they asked if I'd like to teach it. And Janet was in it. And she was a pretty good student. But one of the things about the course is you start realizing there's a big effort to making a documentary. And so I think around the 5th class or so, she came up to me and she said, you know, I've got this opportunity for a documentary. It's a very small budget, and I don't think I can do it. But if we work together, I think we could do it. So without knowing what the budget was, I said yes, because I liked her and because I thought it was a noble effort, noble objective. And so that was probably in winter or late spring or early spring of 2011. We shot all through the summer of 2010, and there were basically 2.5 people on the project. Janet as a producer, me as a director, shooter, and my son, Jason, helped me with some B-roll. So we're the only ones. I edited it and we released it in early 2012, I think. I'm sorry, was that there a question? Oh,
No, I think it's just
oh,
someone's
okay.
off. Someone's.
Okay. So yeah, so that's a little bit of the backstory, and I mean, just FYI, I came back to New Mexico to look after aging parents too, you know, so this happens, but I still had the opportunity to come out to California and make documentaries, so I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. So after the screening, we will have a Q&A involving Janet and the movie. If anyone has any questions about the documentary for Janet or Toby, we will also have Liz Beal with CFROG, who will be addressing some of her current concerns. And then Stephanie will have a chance to speak to us too about the oil spill and then what's happening, what's happened actually with current events up in Santa Barbara. So Cassie, did you want to just go ahead and start the movie?
May I ask a question before you get started, please? I know
Sure.
Surfrider. I don't know what CFROG is. What is an acronym?
I'm going to say the old Liz, do you want to unmute yourself and just explain a little bit about CFROG?
Yeah, so we're a local nonprofit. We work primarily in Ventura County with a little bit of concern in Santa Barbara County as well. And it's an acronym that stands for Climate First, Replacing Oil and Gas. And we serve as an oil and gas watchdog, looking at permitting and regulation of oil companies across the Central Coast.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, I will go ahead and get us started. And I also wanted to say I will be sending a follow-up email after this with all the links that'll be mentioned in the discussion. So if you'd like to get that follow-up email instead of trying to save all the links that I'm going to put in the chat, go ahead and message me your email address. You can do it in the chat publicly, or if you want to do it privately, just click the chat and then at the 2, it goes to everyone, or you can have it go directly to me, Cassie. So send me your emails if you'd like to receive that email, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay. We're going to do this.
I was at home one night watching television and I saw a little news flash that said there was a little small problem at platform A. And that was nothing to worry about. Everything was under control. So the next morning I went out to platform A to pull my traps, and there was a lot of problem and things weren't under control. And there was this huge bubble of natural gas and oil coming up by the northeast leg of the platform. I'd say the gas and bubble was probably 10 to 15 feet high. Just like if you take a hose and hold it underwater and turn it on and make it bubble up, it was similar to that.
There was once a lovely little town on the coast of California where people lived in nice houses with red-tiled roofs, surrounded by geraniums, bougainvillea, and star jasmine. They went to their beautiful beach often to enjoy the sand, the sun, the water, and the sweet, clean air. With the lyrical name of Santa Barbara, it was a wonderful place to live. to work and to raise children. The people that lived in Santa Barbara considered themselves very fortunate. But then a darkness came. On January 28, 1969, a natural gas blowout fractured the ocean floor below a newly constructed offshore oil drilling platform. The workers on the platform knew something was seriously wrong, but they did not immediately disclose it, trying desperately to repair it themselves. However, within 24 hours, someone made an anonymous call to the offices of the Santa Barbara News Press, the area's most widely read newspaper.
Late in the morning, we got a call, and it was a male voice. It said, "The ocean is boiling around platform A." And I started to ask questions, and this person said, "The ocean is boiling around platform A. Goodbye." And I don't know to this day who that person was.
And in the area of my crapping pots, there was probably 4 inches of oil on the water at that time. The weather was okay that day. Well, that night, the southeast wind brought the oil into Santa Barbara Harbor, and it came into the beaches and came onto the harbor and filled the harbor up with oil.
Once the black tide reached shore, news coverage was immediate. The spill, as it was more commonly called, was just a 2-hour drive up the coast from Los Angeles and was quickly carried by news media around the country and around the world.
I believe when I first heard about the oil spill, it was on television, on the news, and it was quite a popular subject because it affected so many people. I had particular concern, and I decided to go see it for myself to know firsthand what it had done. And so that's what I did, is I went to the beach and witnessed it for myself.
But we woke up that morning and it smelled like tar, and went outside. I thought someone perhaps was tarring the road, but they weren't. And soon enough, neighbors started to gather also and ask what was going on. And someone tuned in to the local radio news and discovered there'd been an oil spill down at the beach. So we all went down there like lemmings. The community just started pouring out onto the beach. And
when I click on that,
shocking. The oil kept
but that's
this very heavy black. In time, the water was all black. The ocean was dead.
I was a young mother living in the community and raising my family, had moved to this area from graduate school studies. My husband, he was a new young professor at UC Santa Barbara, and I was living, we were living in Goleta. We saw the ocean as an important part of our family life because it was a focus of our recreation. I don't remember it specifically because it was a major news item, but the effects of it took just a little bit of time to be absorbed by most of us. Those who were right on the shore immediately reacted and knew, though none of us knew how permanent and long-lasting and devastating the impact would be. That unfolded over time. It seemed to be like a nightmare that never stopped.
It was kind of scary in seeing the seriousness of the adults around us and the type of equipment that they had. There were bulldozers on the beach and people dressed in, all these suits and outfits that were completely covering their bodies to protect them from the oil penetration. It was kind of scary just wondering where it was all going to lead. And it seemed like it was just this continuous flow coming in. It didn't seem like they were, it's not like a simple fix.
The beach
was covered with oil, and the everything was covered with oil, and the smell was so terrible in our house that I think we moved. I'm not sure if we moved out for a while because the smell of the oil was so strong coming into our house.
It was the first time after being here for about 10 years or so, 9 years or so, that it wasn't the same questions about how beautiful the place was. It was, how are you guys dealing with it? What's real on the news? And so it changed the way we kind of perceived our hometown to be. And that was sad.
The sight of the oil on what had been a beautiful beach, and especially seeing dead and dying sea mammals, fish, and birds, had a profound effect on persons, particularly when they realized that the blowout was the result of the oil company's calculated effort to save money.
Then there's other extremes where they definitely, do try to cut corners. That's what happened with the 1969 oil spill. Unocal convinced the federal government to allow them not to install casings all the way down the level that they were
I have sound. Yeah, you're so smart.
where they installed the casings. Now, had they installed the full casings, the blowout probably wouldn't have happened.
Well, it's really difficult when you're looking at something and there's nothing you can do, and they're just dying, because they can't breathe anymore because they're just covered in oil, and and they're looking at you with their eyes, and it's just, it's too hard to bear, really. It's overwhelming. It's just very overwhelming, and it's one thing to see like an inanimate object like a tree or something like that, but when you're looking at a seal that's dying in front of you, and even whales that actually weren't even dead yet, they were there on the ocean, and they were just on the beach, just covered with stuff, and birds. I mean, it's horrible. There's just no other way to put it. It's just horrible.
Violated. It's a very powerful experience to be at the front line of an environmental disaster. I can only think with great feeling about those who are living in the area that experienced the earthquake in Japan. It's earth-shaking, an accident of such significant, or event of such significant magnitude.
In my home, my apartment, and the beach right in my front yard essentially was now fouled. It was something that I felt a deep sickness. I think there was also at that time a real understanding that this is what man was capable of in the worst way. As I mentioned, I was opposed to war, but I had not experienced war. Here I was experiencing environmental degradation of the worst kind. And so it was something that my senses were very, very open. And it was something that on every level was just almost more than you could handle. And I will never forget, and I sometimes will draw on that experience of the animals that were covered with this tar, this black goo.
Called to a congressional hearing, the president of Union Oil said, "I don't like to call it a tragedy. There's been no loss of human life. I'm amazed at the publicity for a few birds." His callousness angered the citizens of Santa Barbara, and while the cleanup was still in process, they began to meet, first in small groups, then in larger, to discuss what steps they could take to protect the coastline from the oil industry.
And I have a friend named Dick Smith, who was a reporter for the news press, local newspaper. He was flying over the channel this particular day, and he saw a big blowout going underneath a platform in the channels. was Platform A, the Union Platform A. And he saw this big platform. He phoned me from his airplane and said, "There's a big blowout going out here, bud. What are we going to do about it?" And I said, right away, I got so angry. I just screamed out, "We got to get oil out." And my boss was in the next office and he said, "Hey, get oil out. Goo. Good name."
You have all these photos. Tell us about the day that you decided to take photos.
Well, I went down, and this is about the 5th or 6th day. Finally, they were bringing a lot of machinery and manpower in to start some kind of cleanup. I don't think they'd had this experience anywhere in the United States that I can think of, experience in doing this. So it's sort of haphazard. I think they were throwing everything against the wall, hoping something would stick. They had boats out in the harbor which were spreading hay and hoping to absorb this massive amount of oil. Actually, there was so much oil there, it looked like maybe 4 or 5 inches on the surface. There's no wave action. And instead of the water being blue or blue-greenish color, it was black, which was very strange. I noticed in the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, their oil was sort of brown color. This is unique. We must have a different grade, just pitch black. And there was very little wave action even coming onto the beaches. It made this funny little slurry sound when it came ashore, sort of weird. And the smell was overwhelming. Just.
It was a story that galvanized the community. And as a young person, it certainly was a different experience because now in the classes we were talking about it, and there were some really wonderful educators. And I think that it was my opportunity. I was in Rod Nash's class at the time. And so I was getting a lot of that perspective from him firsthand as a student. And it was part of what you just layered on and became part of my culture.
From towns and cities all up and down the coast, volunteers came spontaneously to help with the cleanup of the water, the beach, and the animals that were affected.
Anyway, what happened is that out there, then they started spraying dispersant in state and federal waters. And then they passed the law, they couldn't spray it in state waters, so they sprayed it in federal waters. Well, the current would take it right into state waters, but to make this stuff work good, they ran crew boats back and forth through the oil to mix it up with the dispersant, which made it sink. And doing that, they cut the buoys off of my traps with their propellers because you couldn't see them because they were all coated with oil and low in the water. And so I lost about 2/3 of my 80 traps out there.
It was an oil that it was oppressive. And then the death that was associated with it, because we were seeing as you go down the birds, and they would be tarred and they would be struggling and they would die. And even when you tried to take them to the receiving centers, you knew that this was very small chance that there was going to be any survival. And that was the reality. The techniques were just brand new. How do you deal with something like this? People didn't know. And so everything that they tried, in my mind, seemed to be just a failure. It was a stopgap. It was a wish, a hope, and a prayer. And we didn't have much success.
And the manpower, they built these little dinghy boats, and they'd have 2 guys in it, and they'd have a barrel in the center, and they would go out and around the harbor and around the boats, and they would pick up this straw with pitchforks again and put them in the barrel that was in between between the two and these little tiny boats. It really wasn't very effective, I don't think.
Fishermen, whose livelihood was immediately affected by the spill, were hired by the oil company to help with the cleanup, with mixed results.
Well, I had a chance when I came in the first night and the oil was coming in the harbor and they put these booms out. They hired fishermen to go out there and guard the booms and tow them around. And that was the first time that I'd ever worked for an oil company directly, right, for Union Oil. And the pay was $15 an hour. for you, your boat, and a crewman. And other fishermen, mostly abalone divers with small boats that were saltwater cooled engines, were out by the boom, and the hay was being blown all over the water. And so I just stayed on my boat all night. And in the following morning, I went to the guy and said, hey, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, who are you? And I said, well, I've been standing by over there. And he says, well, I want you to go out there by that boom and push on those booms. And I said, no, I don't want to do it, because what had happened during the night is that the abalone boats had sucked the straw up into their intakes and burned up their engines. And these big spikes that were in the pilings holding them together with rope, were, as the boats were bouncing up and down, they were poking the holes and stuff in them. And for $15 an hour, I'm not going to ruin my boat. So that was the end of my working for Union Oil.
Richard Nixon, a Californian who'd been inaugurated as President of the United States only 2 weeks before, visited the area to inspect the damage.
His signature is on the National Environmental Policy Act, which is today the most important federal law on how federal agencies have to protect the environment. His signature is also on the act that created the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. His signature is on the Clean Air Act amendments of 1970, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act of 1972, the Endangered Species Act of 1973. These acts together are probably the most litigated environmental law in U.S. history.
While the county of Santa Barbara continued its work to clean up the beaches and the harbor, federal legislation was sponsored in both the House of Representatives and the Senate to provide for greater protection of the environment. Like many initiatives in Washington, the effort was made to gain political advantage.
Nixon was able to sign so many important pieces of legislation, in part because he was a rival of some members of Congress who were going to run for president or were planning on making a presidential run in 1972. The best example is actually Ed Muskie, the senator from Maine, who was most responsible for pushing through the water pollution control amendments of 1972, which also have Nixon's signature on them. Nixon wanted to be ahead of Muskie on this issue, and Muskie wanted to be ahead of Nixon. So it wasn't really a spirit of bipartisan cooperation, it was really rivalry, which probably explains just about everything that Nixon did anyway. So
1969 was a terrific catalyst to a whole set of regulations. We had none before then. You know, we had the Love Canal and Cuyahoga River that were burning. We had so many events at that time that gave strong reason for us to take legislative action. But now, you know, we see a sort of a resurgence of a pushback against those actions. And I'm working in a climate that is very difficult in terms of protecting our environment.
Santa Barbarans were determined to take a more active role in the interaction between their county and the oil companies.
And locally, the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors became completely hostile to the oil industry. One of the executives at Union Oil complained a few years later that OPEC was easier to deal with than the Santa Barbara Board of Supervisors.
Californians in general did not find that the federal legislation created enough protection for their coastline, which was threatened by massive development, as well as the potentially devastating effects of offshore oil drilling.
The environmental activism motivated by the spill became direct political action in two ways. It became local action, which strengthened all the local laws in the Santa Barbara area. But it also became the Proposition 20, the initiative in California that created the California Coastal Act.
Well, we didn't realize that the platforms were in federal waters we couldn't touch. But we did go to the state with our petitions after we had several thousands of petition signers, and they did respond. The state did eventually remove, I think it was Proposition 20. They did remove all the platforms from the state waters, which is a great success for GOO.
The California initiative process, which is authorized by the state's constitution, allows the citizenry to bypass the legislature and the governor and enact legislation by collecting a certain number of signatures of registered voters and then pass with a majority vote in a general election. Proposition 20 is an example of a California initiative that passed in 1972
to preserve public access to the beach and protect coastal wildlife. It provides for a more balanced review process for all development proposals for the entire California coastline. The immediate public reaction to the 1969 oil disaster not only catalyzed federal and state legislation, it also revitalized existing environmental groups in the Santa Barbara area, as well as creating new organizations that remain active decades later.
My grandfather was on the first board of GOO, Vernon Johnson. And I think sometime around when I was in my early teens, actually, is the first time I actually heard anybody talk about it. And it was Vernon and people talking something about get oil out. And it didn't really register his involvement in that or what that meant, but I understood that there was a big spill and that he got involved in the fight to deal with it or to stop it.
Widespread support grew for the implementation of federal, state, and local legislation to protect the environment. While these laws continue to protect the air and water for all Americans, the relevance of the spill has not faded in the minds of average Santa Barbarans.
Protect Santa Barbara, California, and the oceans, because we are a model for these United States.
Eliminate all offshore drilling off the coast of California and any other coast as well.
If I were to ask the president to do one thing, it would be not only to extend and stand by the moratoriums that have been put in place, but to find some way that they would always be there.
The protection of the California coastline and the environment that surrounds this planet will soon depend on the next generation of citizen activists. They are students sitting in today's high schools, colleges, and universities. Young citizens who understand the importance and need to protect the environment and care enough to be vigorously involved in democratic processes, as well as through their personal actions.
I want them to know that we are dependent on them to be the kind of leaders in their world where they see the value and the importance of the ocean in their lives and in our lives together, and that they dedicate themselves in some way, whether it is through their occupation or their future lives, in protecting that resource, and know that they have a very vital role to play. And all the way from the occupation that they choose to engage in, which could be affected that way, but just in the way that they appreciate and value and work with the environment to protect it.
As you can tell, the 1969 Santa Barbara oil blowout is still alive in the hearts and minds of many Californians. But time moves inexorably forward. The day will ultimately come when those who were there are no longer here. So before then, those of us old and young who wish to leave to our children access to clean beaches and water with flourishing wildlife must become active in coastal issues. These beautiful beaches, this sweet-smelling air, is an achievement that requires constant vigilance combined with energetic involvement in the processes of democracy. It's up to us.
Thank you. Thanks, Cassie. That was fantastic.
I'm sorry, I wasn't aware
That was,
that you were going to do it in that way. I'm sitting in a studio designed to do this kind of work. I could have played it for
yeah.
you. You could have had the
Thank
audio
you.
actually is in sync, but the studio is designed to do exactly that. I wish I'd known in advance. That would have helped you out.
You're hired for free
Actually,
next
Say
time.
no more, Toby.
Noble enough that when you do it again, let
Well,
me know and I'll take care of it.
Thank you for the offer. We appreciate that. But you know, the way you left it, Janet, I'm just gonna ask Liz if she can talk to us a little bit now about the current concerns and issues that she and CFROG are facing. And then I'll ask Stephanie to speak a little bit about the current issues with Santa Barbara. But Janet, you did a great job. Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions for Janet, we'll revisit her and we'll be able to ask her questions and Toby questions about the documentary specifically in just a little bit. So Liz, can you reintroduce yourself and then tell us what
Hi
you're working
everyone,
on.
and Janet and Toby, what a amazing film. Like, you know, and as a fellow person that does film work, I'm sorry about the unsynced audio. I know how frustrating that can be, but yeah, I do think that it was just as powerful, you know, it kind of reflecting on what you documented in 1969. It's really shocking to see that we've seen these worst case scenarios. You know, they've happened to California's Central Coast already in the past, and yet memories are short, and we still face a lot of the same dangers today and have a lot of the same policies today that led to that industrial accident that could lead to future spills of that magnitude along the coast. And also with our concern and focus on public health, we think a lot about inland accidents as well and how much they impact the health of the residents who live close to those developments. So right now with CFROG, two things that are on our radar of huge concern in Ventura County are one, a referendum that's going to be on the ballot in June of 2022 that is an oil industry attempt to circumvent proper permitting for new oil and gas development. And that's both onshore and offshore oil and gas development. And what it would do is if they have these grandfathered in permits from the 40s and 50s, which was, I'm sure, the permit type that was granted to this offshore oil platform in 1969, that those permits allow them to expand indefinitely as long as they have that original use permit. And you know, we're working to try to bring common sense environmental review to Ventura County so that, you know, it doesn't matter when you got your permits, if you want to drill a new well or switch to a more extreme form of extraction, such as fracking or cyclic steam, that you need a new permit and full environmental review. And that won't happen unless Ventura County voters turn out in June in really big numbers and vote yes on that referendum. So that's one of our really big concerns moving forward, because it is these, you know, rather complex permitting rules that determine how safe or unsafe the oil industry activity is. But, you know, ultimately it also is one of those things where as long as the fossil fuel industry exists and operates in our region, we are not safe. And it was interesting to me to see that natural gas was part of this blowout, because a lot of Santa Barbara's offshore oil facilities have been closed up recently. And as a result, the SoCal Gas, who provides both Ventura and Santa Barbara counties with natural gas, is proposing to expand this compressor station in the city of Ventura. And that's in a direct response to meeting the increasing, what they say are the increasing gas needs of up north on the Central Coast, and the reduced natural gas coming out of the offshore facilities. And so they're talking about expanding this natural gas station on the avenue in Ventura that is literally across the street from an elementary school and boys and girls clubs. And these are facilities that usually have a 1.5 mile buffer from the closest residential area because they are so prone to massive leaks and explosions. Another event that happened very recently is the Aliso Canyon natural gas blowout. The health effects of that are still being felt today in Porter Ranch. This facility could have something very similar happen to it, except for that instead of being a mile and a half away from the closest residence, it's in the middle of a dense suburban neighborhood with schools and after school programs literally across the street. So those are our two biggest concerns in the area right now. And I'm happy to answer questions about either one of those. We really do need a lot of involvement on both issues in order to be successful, because we have some, huge industrial interests that are just, I like to think of them kind of in their death throes, are getting more and more aggressive and taking more and more risks with our children's lives, with the health of our ocean, with our air, land, and water being all absolutely put at risk every day from one misstep, one accident, and we could permanently damage this place we call our home.
I think Janet had a question. The hand raising thing cracks me up. So, Janet, I feel like I'm in school.
So you said June 27th. There is
no June 2022.
Oh, 22. Okay, so you have some time to work on raising awareness on this.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're just beginning our campaign and outreach.
Well, we'll have to talk about what we can do to help with that, if in anything in any way. So, because we've seen these players before.
Yep.
And,
familiar faces all around.
The idea that these guys are going to certainly, change their stripes is naive. So
what's real interesting to me is around here we have a lot of oil companies that they do some misdeeds, they have a few spills, they get slapped down a little bit by environmental health, and they go bankrupt, and then they're reborn as a new LLC. So we stay with the same players recycling over and over again, and it's just this pattern of like malfeasance, bankruptcy, new identity, and on and on and on it goes.
And meanwhile, they leave their trash behind.
Yeah, and we're left, the taxpayer is left picking up the mess.
Sounds like Calico. So one of the things that we really need to do as a community is when CFROG has a call to action, if it's a petition, if it's, I don't know, Liz, if everyone can start subscribing to the CFROG newsletter, whatever you need from us, we'll repost. And then, like Janet was saying, it's really about call to action, getting the word out. Yes, we do have time, but there's a lot of work to do. So I think the most important thing is to stay informed and stay actively paying attention to what our partners are trying to accomplish. Does anybody have any questions for Liz right now? There was something in the chat, but I cannot see without my glasses on.
There was a comment or multiple comments, but I haven't seen any questions yet. Oh, except for from Ryan Rubin asked, why don't we sponsor our own referendum? I think that was maybe to Liz.
And then we meaning me and you, or I don't. Liz, do you have a
yeah? I mean, the seeing Proposition 20 in this film was actually really inspiring, and there certainly is talk amongst environmental groups, a collaborative here in the county. Like, could we put together our own referendum that would override the referendum that we're fighting right now? And what we're honestly thinking at this point, and this isn't really CFROG's decision, this is a broader coalition, but we are thinking that we're going to put all hands on deck toward June to try to get that yes vote. Getting yes on a referendum is always harder than getting no. But that if that doesn't get the votes that it needs, that we would look toward putting something on the ballot in November, which is a general election and generally has a more progressive turnout. So that's the thought right now, is to put everything towards June, and then the general election in November would be our more likely placement for our own referendum.
I remember you said something about that when you presented at our chapter meeting.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of work, you know. I know
Yes,
you.
I mean,
really.
you know, it's funny because the oil industry put this one on the ballot by gathering signatures, but of course they hired paid circulators, and those circulators, you know, dealt in lies and half truths in order to get their signatures. And you know, from our perspective, it would be a 100% volunteer effort, and that is definitely a much larger challenge than the way that they do it. So we're definitely, you know, thinking about the people power that it would take, but I think that that right now, we're hopeful that June will go our way.
Definitely.
I just wanted to add that Proposition 20 was the last statewide initiative in California that qualified with volunteer signature gatherers. And they did it in record time. It was amazing. And the other documentary that I did with Toby is called Heroes of the Coast, the documentary, and it's about the passage of Prop 20 and the creation of the Coastal Commission and subsequent in very shorthand form the history of the Coastal Commission.
Right.
So I did post a link to that documentary in the chat room. So it's a little bit longer. It's 55 minutes long, but it explains the whole story of how Proposition 20 came about. And some of we had the opportunity to interview some of the key players, and since then many of them passed away. But it makes for an interesting story, and it's on YouTube. Like I said, I posted the link on there.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks. So,
So,
Stephanie, did you want to introduce yourself and take a minute to explain about your role in the Santa Barbara Surfrider chapter? And I think you maybe had a couple of things you wanted to say.
So yeah, my name is Stephanie Robertson, and I am the treasurer for Santa Barbara's Surfrider chapter. And I was just gonna talk just a few minutes, if I could. You know, since the 1969 oil spill, we've also had, I'm sure many of you remember the 2015 oil spill, the Refugio oil spill, and that one was particularly devastating because I'm sure many of you know that Santa Barbara is a particularly diverse area. Because it's kind of a convergence of where warm and cold waters converge on the California coast, and it was really an absolutely incredible story because you know, once again, much like in '69, you know, people were not being forthcoming about what was going on. It was who was it? It was the Plains All American pipeline. They had their pipeline burst, the 901 pipeline burst, and started flooding oil as it was coming down, you know, coming down through the Gaviota coast. And it was interesting. What had happened was they were doing work on the pipelines elsewhere on a pump, and they had silenced the alarm. So no one was really aware except for people who were seeing this happen. So there was no shut off. There was no way of stopping this oil. And it took like 3 or 4 hours for anyone to get it together enough to turn off the oil upstream in order to stop it. What was even worse was that instead of getting right to work doing the cleanup, it took them over 24 hours to get crews down there and start working. We actually have members who of our local chapter who went down and were volunteers. Dean, our our secretary actually went down and was shoveling oil the next day. And Mark Morey is our chapter president. He was actually part of the team that went out and took samples and actually tracked how far this oil traveled. But I mean, it was maybe not as devastating as 1969, but it was still a fairly devastating spill. One of the good things that has come out of this is that in 2018, there was actually legislation passed that prohibits new building within, I think it's 3 miles of the coast within the state boundaries. So we're really grateful that that's been going on.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I think that, clearly it's an ongoing concern. And Liz, can I just ask a quick question? Aside from CFROG, and is GOO still active? But how do we, I mean, you can't be the Lone Ranger out there.
Oh, no,
right?
absolutely not. I don't think GOO is still active that I know of, that they should be, because I love their name so much. But in Santa Barbara, Environmental Defense Center is leading the charge, and Linda Kropp was in the video. She still looks exactly the same. I would say also Sierra Club's Los Padres chapter is very heavily involved in Central Coast oil and gas issues. Food and Water Watch is a big group, and then CAUSE that helped shut down the Puente power plant in Oxnard. Very, very powerful community organizing group there as well. So those are our main partners that we work with on a very regular basis.
That's great.
Liz, I'd like to make an offer to you. My business partner and I are experts at live streaming, podcasting, using content, and we host 4 live streams a week on various topics.
Oh, wow.
And we also have 5 clients that we basically, using our studio, enable them to have their own live streams. We work in the background as director and producer. But I have in the past, and Janet knows this, because I recently made a similar offer to the candidate that she's working for here in New Mexico, who's going to take the place of Deb Holland after she's moved to the, what she has.
Oh, yeah.
Secretary of the Department of the Interior. So do you all have a YouTube channel?
Not that we really use. We do have one.
You do?
Yeah.
Would you do me a favor? My email address is tyounis, tyounis@gmail.com. Send me a link to your YouTube channel. Here's the offer that I'll make you. Can you give me permission to show you something on my screen? So I can share my screen with you.
I think you're co-host already.
I think you should
Okay.
be good.
Let me show you something here real quick.
You almost sound like a game show host, Toby. I'm
Like a
gonna
what?
make you an offer. I'm gonna make you an offer. Liz. Come on down.
Well, and I was going to ask both Toby and Janet about filmmaking help, because we have a youth advocacy group called the Environmental Voices Academy. They're high school juniors and seniors, and there's 12 total, but we have a group of 4, and I think some are here tonight that are interested, are going to be making a short film about environmental justice in Ventura County, and I would love to sort of pick your brain a little bit about what they're trying to do.
The key for a documentary making is the plan, the storytelling plan, and the questions you ask. And I'll give them at least 2, maybe 3 ways to ask questions, so you get the content that you need.
Maybe
So
if you guys can all hook up after the evening is over.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Glad to.
So what you should have on your screen right now is our messages and methods channel. And this channel is focused on interviewing senior citizens, plus 50s as we call them, who are working towards a second career. We call it an encore career. The point that I want to make is this gentleman is in New Jersey. My partner, Shelley Carney, and I are in the studio here. And we're live streaming not only to this channel on YouTube, but to another channel on YouTube, another channel on Twitch, and 4 channels on Facebook, all simultaneously. And it's an interview program. We simply ask questions and let him tell his story, right? Because the idea is to share his expertise and his experiences building a business as a senior citizen, right? These encore entrepreneurs. He happened to have the benefit of, he was on a television program, CBS, I think, television program called The Voice back in 2016. And he got 4 chair turns. That means something. He didn't go on to win, but he was 46 at the time. And that's not exactly the kind of person that you'd expect to be on The Voice. My point is, we have the ability to set up a interaction using video and audio of very high quality with all kind of the you'll see, let me just play.
Toby, you know what? I apologize. Maybe
Yeah.
you guys can do this after, like I'll get connected. You can talk to Liz and Toby, you can just maybe another time. I don't know that this
Anytime,
is really,
Liz, just reach out to you.
I will reach out for sure. This looks amazing.
And the point I was going to make for this is, if you like, I'll do it at no charge.
Oh, wow.
Once again, you're hired for free.
I know.
One of the benefits of being retired is you don't actually have to make a living. So
well, when honestly, everyone, when you're a nonprofit and your mission is really the most important thing that drives your work, and all of us really work very hard to make sure that our voices are heard and the mission is put out, the message is put out, the brand is put out. All of us, I was talking to Cassie earlier about how really what a wonderful group of people we work with, and all of our partners and all of you tonight. We really appreciate it, and it just seems like it's just head down, do the work, and there's a lot of reward. And you can see from the documentary tonight that a lot of times the reward comes on the heels of tragedy, but like things do get accomplished. It just takes time. So I don't know, does anybody have any questions for Janet or Toby about the documentary itself? I think that your introduction and the documentary pretty much spoke for itself for me, and your message, Janet, throughout the documentary in terms of a call to action is really crucial. And because we are coastal and we are always being threatened and we're always being faced with, how to protect and preserve, it just seems like the work never ends. And I really respect everyone and their dedication to all of our missions. So I think that in the chat, if anybody wants to put their email in the chat, and then Cassie can send you an email back thanking you for reaching out and joining the meeting tonight, watching the documentary. And there are references to many different links and outlets that we can share with you later. But this is also being recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel shortly. And then if anybody wants to pass it, share it, Liz, you can put it up on your inactive YouTube channel as well. So it's great. So
I did have a question, and I guess this can be answered both by Janet and Liz. So watching this, obviously I'm thinking, well, what about all the new leases that are out there? What about all the pumping that's going on now? Since the making of that film, obviously there was some really great legislation passed to protect our waters, but what's going on currently to mitigate any potential offshore oil spills going on with the still active leases that are going on? Or is there something like that? Did they come up with some ingenious plan? I mean, obviously there's been a ton of not a ton, but a good amount of oil spills, as Stephanie mentioned up in Goleta. Is there a better mitigation strategy that they came up with? Because obviously there more spills are going to happen because they're not meant to last forever. They just simply aren't. It seems obvious.
I mean, I think the biggest concern right now, both onshore and offshore, is sort of the situation with the older infrastructure that's out there. And the fact that a lot of these wells are now idle for a very long time, and that the state of California doesn't really have adequate regulations over the idling of wells. So a lot of oil companies use that to just leave a well in an abandoned state, or, not technically abandoned, but just sitting there for, instead of having a 5-year limit, some of these idle wells are 40 years idle. And when you just sit on infrastructure like that and let it, slowly be taken over by the sands of time, then that becomes more accidents waiting to happen. And I think that's my biggest concern is the idle infrastructure that's out there on the coast. And then inland, we have a secondary problem. And CFROG is actually doing what we think is probably the first ever study of its kind of abandoned wells in Ventura County. So underneath the ground, most of Ventura County kind of looks like Swiss cheese. There's just all of these old well bores that were drilled starting in the 1800s, but really ramping up into the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And anything that got plugged up prior to 1965 or so was not plugged to modern environmental standards, meaning instead of, cement casings and proper closure, they just backfilled the hole with mud and rocks and whatever was, you go back into these old records and you say it was filled with paper sacks, it was filled with rope. I mean, you just find the weirdest stuff. And so we've gone back into all these old records and done this systematic review of all these abandoned wells. We have a report that's going to come out hopefully by mid-June that details all these problems underground that are putting our land and water at risk, because when you have these old wells that weren't properly cased, there's, when you think about geologic layers, like the layers of a pancake, you'll have, here's the freshwater aquifer, here's the water layer that we depend on for our agriculture, for our drinking water. And then a few layers below, here's that oil bearing formation. And then you've got all these abandoned wells going through like a bunch of straws through the pancakes. And now they're saying, let's do something really extreme, like put some high pressure steam into that oil bearing layer to get out all this gooey tar sand stuff. Well, all those little old abandoned wells that were just plugged with mud, those serve as migration pathways. Those allow connectivity between the oil bearing layer and the aquifer layer. You add pressure and it's just a recipe for our aquifers being permanently contaminated with oil. So that's a situation that we're facing. Cat Canyon in Santa Barbara and the Oxnard oil field in Ventura County, both of those spots are at really high risk for permanent damage to our aquifers.
That is I think Laura said it best, that is terrifying. Is there a link or a spot on your website where people can go to learn more about this and this research that you're doing, or is it coming out soon?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably there's a little blurb on our website if you look under current campaigns, but we're getting our whole website redone, and then we have the report that will be way more detail. But yeah, right now, probably only like a couple paragraphs online.
It's exciting. I can't wait to hear it, read it.
Do you have a home for that report? Do you have an end goal after the report is done?
Yeah, the timing is actually purposeful in that CalGEM, that used to be called DOGGR, the state's oil and gas regulatory agency, they are doing a public health rulemaking over the summer that's supposed to come out in June, where they're consulting with public health experts about their role in protecting community health in their regulation of oil and gas. So we hope to deliver this report in concert with that public workshop to put the issue of abandoned wells on the map as a health impact issue at the statewide level. And we also are working with a university. It's not official yet, so I can't really say, but we're working with a university who might turn it into a statewide report. So there's a graduate public policy program that's interested in doing that, which would be really exciting.
Wonderful.
When is the workshop? Janet asked. We don't know yet. They keep kicking that can down the road. It was supposed to be in February, then May. Now they're saying June or July.
Okay, but soon.
Soon, yes.
Okay.
Assuming it doesn't get bumped again.
Thank you. That was great. Good information. Great question, Cassie. Does anybody have any other questions? I think we're getting close to the end of the time. Yeah. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for coming tonight and really appreciate all the participation, all the effort, all the energy and the passion that goes into really trying to help protect our environment. And thank you all for joining us tonight. And again, this was recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel soon. And if anyone you know missed it that wants to see it, you can share it with them. They can take a look at it shortly. Well, thank you, and happy Hands Across the Sand to everyone tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you. And thank
You're
you to
welcome.
Surfrider for all that you do.
You're welcome. Thank you. See you all. Bye.
Bye.